Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. We have a really special guest today. Father Greg Boyle is with me. Father Boyle in 1988 founded something that now has become Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles. And it's the largest gang intervention program in the world. It's an amazing work that they do. And he's really an incredible guy. I think you'll really enjoy it. So stay tuned. Greg Boyle, The Good Life is next. Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson, and so glad you've joined us today. I have a really special guest today. Father Greg Boyle is with me. Father Boyle is the founder of Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles, which is now the largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and reentry program in the world. Father Boyle was ordained as a priest in 1984, and he founded Homeboy Industries in 1988. Father Boyle witnessed the devastating impact of gang violence on the community in Los Angeles during what was called the Decade of Death that began in the late 1980s and peaked at 1,000 gang-related killings in 1992. And so he decided to do something. And in 1988, they started what would eventually become Homeboy Industries. Homeboy Industries, for those of you that are not familiar, employs and trains former gang members in a range of social enterprises, as well as providing critical services to thousands of men and women every year. Father Boyle is the author of the 2010 New York Times bestseller, Tattoos on the Heart, The Power of Boundless Compassion. And in 2014, President Obama named Father Boyle a champion of change. So Father Boyle, welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Great to be with you, Dean.
I actually wanted to start on the current climate. And, you know, of course, this year has been kind of a humdinger for everybody, you know, coming off of, you know, in the middle of the pandemic, we have the horrific George Floyd killing and the protests and uprisings that have followed. In this climate, and I know Homeboy is doing a lot in terms of meals that you just told me about in terms of addressing the need, but how would you encourage people to be peacemakers in this current time?
Yeah, I think part of the thing that I've learned from gang members is gang violence is about something else. So the trick in everything is to find the something else. And so even doing work with gang members over time, you know, people would say, well, we need to work for peace. And I was always kind of old fashioned. I always thought peace required conflict. And in gang violence anyway, there's no conflict. It's not about it. There's violence, but there's no conflict. It's not about anything. You can't sit down at the table. So you have to find the something else. And gang violence was only about despair, trauma, and mental illness. So then you try to infuse hope, try to heal trauma, and you try to deliver mental health services. In the same way, it's not about trying to quiet things down or make things calm or that there are opposing sides. They aren't. The great John Lewis says, we all live in the same house. He doesn't say one day we'll live in the same house. He says, no, we all live in the same house. He's not talking about climate change and that we all occupy the same planet. He's talking about the reality of kinship and connection and that we belong to each other. That's our truth. So we need to inhabit it. But we kind of cut to the chase so often. You know, we want to address things right on the head, you know, and nail being hit by hammer exactly on the head. And I don't know anything that works that way. And we feel good about it when we want to address things head on, but it's kind of not how if we have reverence for how complex human beings are, we know that everything's about something else. So you start to question things and see things differently. You want to see things as God does. You want to take seriously what Jesus took seriously, for example. And then things start to kind of, the byproduct of all that is peace.
Could you take us back a little bit on how kind of this started in your road? I actually watching the great John Lewis's memorial this morning. President Clinton told the story about, when on Bloody Sunday, one of the books in John Lewis's backpack was Thomas Merton, a book about Thomas Merton, this monk that you wouldn't necessarily connect John Lewis with Thomas Merton necessarily. I was kind of interested in that, and I was thinking about you, and here's a priest ordained in 1984 who is now spent a lot of his life involved with gang members. How did it start?
Well, people always presume that you kind of start out to do something. And that's never happened in my life. I've never really started out to do anything. But there I was, pastor of the poorest parish in the city, smack dab in the middle of really large public housing projects, 8 gangs all at war with each other, the highest concentration of gang activity in the city. There I was. And so I didn't set out to do anything, but you're responding to things, and you're trying to be faithful. And so you try to somehow respond to what's happening today. That's kind of how it works. At some point you maybe make plans and what if we did this and what if we did that, but it's mainly the duty to delight in the present moment, and then what are we going to do about the fact that in those days I was burying so many kids. So I buried my first young person killed because of the sadness in 1988, but I buried my 235th last week. And so not all from that community, but because I run a large gang intervention program, I know gang members. So I get asked to do this. And so you just respond to whatever is right in front of you.
And in that time, I was reading a little bit about the last 30 years and 7,800 community clients. You guys do tattoo removal. There's been about 12,000 tattoo removal class sessions, trainees, and a lot of community members supported therapy sessions. And so those numbers are wonderful, and to see the culmination of it. But one of the things I always think about is when Jesus talks about, whatever you did for one of the least of these. I used to always read that wrong and think in terms of whatever you did for the least, in terms of some kind of category of, where you're trying to work on some category. But really, it's like you just said, it's really about the person in front of you, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Mother Teresa said the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that we belong? And Jesus, really articulated only 2 aspirations. One was that you may be one, and the other one is my joy yours, your joy complete. There were a lot of things he said, but in the end, that's sort of what the aspirations were for us going forward. And they're pretty good, and they're very generous and spacious and expansive. And they're not about worship me. They're not about him at all. They're about us, that you may be one and your joy is important to me. And so, so Jesus took 4 things seriously: inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional loving kindness, and compassionate acceptance. And I suspect in the end, all four of those things is why John Lewis had the Thomas Merton book in his backpack, because it was about being anchored and putting first things recognizably first and living as though the truth were true. And so that we can all celebrate that we all live in the same house. So it's about unity and connection and mutually exquisite kinship, and it's about joy, and it really is about joy. How do we help each other get to joy?
Yeah, could you repeat those four again, Father Boyle, if you don't mind? That's
inclusion,
inclusion,
nonviolence, unconditional loving kindness, and compassionate acceptance. And so it's a way of also, my friend Mirabai Starr, who's a mystic, and she writes about mystics. She says, once you know the God of love, you fire all the other gods. and part of that is, if we're excluding, if you're following a God who is inviting you to exclude, fire that God. Or, the God that permits you to separate children from their parents at the border, fire that God. Or who thinks it's okay to pack a church during a pandemic, give that God marching papers. So I think the point is kind of to refine and find the marrow of the gospel, so we don't stray from the four things that Jesus took seriously. There are only four things, but they're big things. Even violence, it's about language even. And how do we, embrace the tenderness, which is the highest form of spiritual maturity. So these are hard things, but they're clear things. That's the part that's liberating.
Yeah, that's a wonderful quote. I read something from Tim Keller the other day saying something similar. I think, and he said something like, tell me about the God you reject. Tell me about the God that, such and such, because maybe I don't believe in that God either. So I think
I mean, put positively, there is nothing more consequential than the God you have. And that's why it matters. Marcus Borg used to always say, it matters what your image of God is. And I would say more than matters, it's absolutely consequential. It'll be the engine of whatever your vehicle does,
Right. I want to talk about compassion for a minute. Your book, Tattoos on the Heart, The Power of Boundless Compassion. One of my pastors last week was preaching about compassion, and he said that the word compassion actually means to suffer with, which was interesting to me, kind of separating it from empathy. But it was actually, at least the way he defined it, was the word compassion meaning to suffer with. What does it mean to you to have compassion?
Well, tomorrow I'm going to bury a 93-year-old woman who had 13 kids. And, part of the thing was, when you have that many kids, I come from a family of 8. The question that gets asked is, secretly, do you have favorites or a favorite? And she said, yeah, I do. Of course I do. And you're kind of startled by it. And then she says in Spanish, el que sufre más, the one who suffers the most. That's my favorite. And one day it's the oldest one, and one day it's number 4, and one day it's number 13. But that's sort of how God is. That's what the preferential option is. That's what the covenant about widow, orphan, stranger. It's about el que sufre más. It's about the one who is suffering the most. and that's why you go there. It doesn't dismiss other people, but it says that's where we need to go. That's why we go to the margins. And in the covenant, the original covenant that talked about the widow, orphan, and the stranger, it meant society. These were the people who society told, you do not matter to us. And what happens to you is of no concern, and you do not count. And this is why you go to them, because it's the fundamental message. And so we all share in kind of God's own view, which is to go to the person que sufre más. And that changes us to do that. But it's still part of the duty to delight, as Dorothy Day would talk about it, that it's still about being engaged in relational wholeness to the other. And you want to be there. And it's in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, but it's solidarity and it's accompaniment. And you don't go to the margins to reach people, but you go there so that you'll be reached. And you don't go to the margins to make a difference, like every commencement address always says. You go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different.
That's beautiful. I have this thought that I always share, that we have a brain injured daughter. She's 18 now. She had a massive stroke in the womb, and she wasn't supposed to live, and she has, and she's changed our life. And I've watched my wife lay down her life for 24 hours a day for 18 years. And what it's taught me is that I don't think we're ever more alive than when we're giving our lives away. And that is what you're saying resonates with me, that when we go to the least, or quote unquote, or the margins, it does something to us. It's an amazing way that God can work, that something that, in our case, it's a life-changing, horrific circumstance that you never would ask for. And then yet here we are on the other side 18 years later, and we wouldn't trade it for a whole brain. Never would we trade it. It's changed her life. She changed her life. That little girl, who's the happiest person I know, never keeps record of wrong, not worried about tomorrow, not mad about yesterday, always happy to see you, not a respecter of persons, loves the President of the United States or the waiter exactly the same. I mean, it's really remarkable what can happen to us, isn't it?
Sure. I think that's where the joy is, because it's part of it is, you move to be other-centered, and yeah, it's about service, but service is where you begin. It's not where you end. And then it's about loving, being loving. And this is what your daughter extracts from you. And so people will say, and I'm sure they've said this to you, it must be hard.
Right.
And yet the best kept secret is, it's where the joy is. And what folks don't know is that you have what the world longs for.
Isn't that spectacular? We could end right there, but I have a couple other things. That's a spectacular thought.
Yeah,
and that is,
I believe it,
amazing.
and you believe it. And she's brought, what's her name?
Ella Claire.
Ella Claire. She's
Ella
brought
Claire.
you to that.
Yeah.
It's an incredible gift.
What a gift. Yeah, what a gift. Lastly, I wonder, we focus on youth a fair amount in some of the work we do, and we're always interested in young people, and in this current environment where there's obviously a pandemic going on, which is affecting people, the economy, jobs, and then we have a fair amount of unrest and anger, and there's feelings, and there's some level of division, and then you throw in that we're in an election year. We got kind of a lot going on. What would you say to a young people? I mean, I think about hope. And I think, Dallas Willard talks about hope as the expectation of the good. Um, and I think in this environment, to have an expectation of the good is maybe a little trickier than other times. I mean, I know every generation has their challenges, but what would you say, or if you were sitting down with a young person today and they were talking about their life or their future, and they were feeling hopeless, or they were feeling lost or discouraged, what would be any counsel that you might give them?
Yeah, I don't give advice. I don't give counsel. At Homeboy, we say hope has an address. And that's not for nothing that we say that, because it's not about a message, and it's not even about a messenger. It's about the context of the beloved community, really. It's about the context of a community of tenderness where people feel cherished. It kind of goes back to that Maya Angelou notion that says people won't always remember what you say to them, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And that's the key thing. So in my situation, if it's likely that a traumatized person will cause more trauma, like everybody who walks through our doors. It's also true that a cherished person will be able to find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. That's where the joy is. And so it's not about advice. It's not about words. I go out of my way not to do that, because I think it's about creating a culture and a community. And how do people feel when they walk out the door? And it's more like that. I have 35 years of working with gang members, and they'll come back to me after long prison terms, and they'll say things to me like this always: "I'll never forget what you said to me." And then they'll proceed to say something that I know I never said to anybody, because half the time I kind of don't believe it, or it's theology that's really not. Anyway, they invent that stuff. But what they're really trying to say is, I felt this way.
Yeah.
Which is fine. They can put whatever words they want in my mouth. And so, but it's more about the context, not the content. And we've forgotten how to listen. We lecture more than listen. And so how do we receive young people? How do we allow them to alter our hearts? That's what we want. And to become less reliant on, I have a message that needs to get delivered.
Last question, just relating to your thoughts on incarceration. I know that there's been and I've gotten to know Susan Burton a little bit down there in Los Angeles, who's done some amazing work related to trying to help people understand that incarceration is not the answer. But would you have any thoughts to share on how you see incarceration?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm a big proponent of everything's about something else. So if you were to talk about excessive use of force by police, that's really about, we've forgotten that we belong to each other. The minute we remember it, nobody's going to put a knee to anybody's neck. And by the same token, the fact that our prisons are filled with poor people of color just means that we've forgotten that we belong to each other. And so you imagine a circle of compassion, you imagine nobody standing outside that circle. So you really do seek to dismantle the barriers that exclude. And in LA, you know that the largest mental institution in the world is LA County Jail, which tells a person that we've forgotten that we belong to each other. So we've decided to punish, wound, rather than heal it. And so it's hard to imagine a way to redeem prisons because they're born of a lie, which is we don't belong to each other. There's some people who don't belong to us, and that's just untruth. All demonizing is untruth, and all demonizing is the opposite of how God sees. But one day we'll see that we all live in the same house.
Yeah. Has there been a, just, we have a couple minutes left, but has there been a, and I'm not asking you for a formula or just okay, has there been a person, a mentor, a friend who's been really significant in your life?
Yeah, people don't believe this. And, I mean, I have, there are people I admire, there are people I read. Merton is one, and John Lewis is another, and Cesar Chavez, and Pema Chodron, people I read and listen to. But the truth is, my heart has been altered by the thousands of gang members I've come to know, and the day won't ever come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I'm closer to God than these men and women. And so that's kind of more the truth.
Wow, that's beautiful. Well, Father Boyle, it's really been an honor to spend some time with you, and I appreciate your thoughts. This is wonderful, and we're rooting for Homeboy, and I think it's powerful what's happened here. So thank you for spending some time with us.
Well, blessings to you and to Ellen Claire.
Thank you, sir. Okay. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
This is Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. A great program today. Tom Reed is with me. Tom is a good friend, and he is the executive director of the Unity Shop here in Santa Barbara that has kind of a national footprint as well. Tom's a great guy. I think you'll learn a lot. So stay tuned to The Good Life. It's next. This is Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. Thanks for joining us today. I have a special guest, longtime friend. Tom Reed is with me. Welcome, Tom.
Well, Dean, it's good to be with you today.
Tom was born in San Antonio, Texas, raised in Michigan, served in the Air Force as a pilot, I believe.
True enough.
And joined the Unity Shop as development director in 2002 and then executive director in 2004. Tom, tell us, just before we get into the Unity Shop and your work that you do, tell us just a little bit about your kind of born and raised, your family of origin, and how you got to California.
Well, we could take all the time with that. I was born in San Antonio, but I didn't like it. I left when I was 6 weeks old. My dad was a howitzer instructor in World War II. We waited until I was born so that the Army could pay for that. And then we all jumped in a car and headed to Michigan, where I was raised. Went to Michigan State University, degree in advertising. Mostly played guitar and hockey in college, but then when the Vietnam War was on, ended up going to the Air Force as a pilot for 5 years, and kind of grew up a little bit there. They handed me a $20 million airplane and an 8-man crew, and they said, "Here, you take this stuff to Ethiopia, and you are responsible for it." So that was a great period of my life. And so then after in the Air Force, I met a guy who was a general's aide, and he and I kind of vibrated about the same business venture goals and dreams. And so I moved to California when I got out of the Air Force in 1974, and I got into real estate development with him. Ended up losing a home to a fire in 1978, and everything I'd collected flying around the world in the Air Force went up in a heartbeat. And I was just in the midst of talking to some business guys about spiritual things. I wasn't particularly interested in religion at that point, but they were just talking about Christ and the Bible, and so I was interested in that, but very confusing when my house burned down, and trying to figure out how all that fit. And then I moved to Reno, Nevada, had some business things up there that we were developing, and built a house, and it was destroyed in an avalanche-induced mudslide. That was 5 years after the fire. But a good friend of mine was killed in my house, and he was a young pastor, about 34 years old, and that was one of those that was a hinge point, that door of my life swings on, that was a life changer for me. And I just thought, I didn't have the emotional energy to just get in business and try to make money. I was trying to struggle with, what are we doing here? What's the meaning in life? What's the purpose? What's important? What's it all about? And so I got out of the business world and kind of went into an outreach to businessmen and traveling musician, doing music about what I was learning about, essentially, in churches and men's conferences primarily. Did that for 15 years, and then moved to Santa Barbara in 2000, got introduced to the Unity Shop, and it was kind of a continuation. It's what we're supposed to do to take care of each other and take care of the less fortunate. And I think the meaning and purpose is a natural continuation for me.
Wow. So you experienced a lot of kind of trauma.
Well, oddly enough, it parallels what we've been through here in Santa Barbara. You know, the Thomas Fire and then the mudslide. I can identify with everything those people went through, and the people that we take care of. And so that's, I think, what it points to is that idea of identifying and vibrating to what the need is. It's just easy to kind of get caught up in your own track and be thinking about your own agenda, because that's natural. What kind of bends you out of that sort of routine is to think more on the spiritual side of, you know, so what can we do for others? What can we do that's really meaningful and make a difference in life?
Yeah. Let's pretend for a minute, before we get into the current kind of situation and the crisis that we're facing. Let's pretend for a minute that somebody's never heard of the Unity Shop. They're watching this wherever they are. Actually, the Unity Shop, Santa Barbara, California. Tell us what it is.
Well, the Unity Shop started by Pearl Chase, who's a very famous name actually in Santa Barbara history, but it was in 1917, 103 years ago. It was Christmas only, volunteers, and they did food for families that were struggling, toys for kids, even if they were used and broken, and they gave stuffed animals away to seniors that were in convalescent hospitals. I think that was the three little committees. And the whole idea was that these families, especially, and it was Christmas only, of course, for 60 or 70 years. And so it was just a sensitivity to the fact that people can go through a difficult time. And a lot of the folks way back then were taking care of people's homes that were like second homes. A lot of people lived in LA but had a home here, and the people that were taking care of those would go through very, very difficult times. And so to provide some food or kind of temporary crisis too. And so that has gone year round as of about the mid 80s, 1980s, and expanded from 3 little programs to 8 different programs now, all responding to what the people's needs are that we're experiencing in Santa Barbara County. So we've gotten up to 22,610 people that we've taken care of. But what's unique about it is we have over 300 social service agencies. Could be Department of Social Services, unemployment, could be schools, nurses, teachers, and counselors can refer families to us when they discover they're in need. It could be, you know, a church, a hospital, counseling centers. 300 of those find out people are struggling in temporary crisis of some kind, and to prevent them in the sort of a safety net action to keep them from falling deep into welfare or even going homeless, they're sent to the Unity Shop. Almost everybody needs food. And so as a crying basic human need, we've created a full-on grocery store. And the unique aspect of Unity Shop is when they come through for whatever the need is that we're providing for, they have the choice. We're not handing them a bag of food or a box of food. We're letting them choose, which honors their preference, restores a little of their dignity. It preserves the family unit, reinforces the family in a sense, because it's not an unusual scenario for the kids that come with the families. So we got school clothes, school supplies whenever the families come through. Of course, there's clothing, personal care items, household goods, all the things that families might need that they might have to buy. And when they're going through a crisis, dollars are the key. So whatever we can provide, car seats or strollers or whatever else, that saves them the responsibility of trying to come up with the money or using those precious dollars for things like that. So that helps. We give away new school clothes, new school supplies. That helps the kids not feel self-conscious in school and helps them succeed. Toys at Christmas, we gave 3,000 families an opportunity to come through for food and winter clothes and toys the holiday season last year. We also have a program called Job Smart, professional clothing for people getting into the workplace, resume help, tips on taking an interview, and long-term disaster recovery program. That's kind of what we talked about earlier with the fire mudslide thing, or one single house burning down. All of a sudden, there's huge needs. So we take care of that. And then we take care of 3,300 seniors in our Senior Resource Center. So that's the Unity Shop, and it's all done in kind of a manner that's responding to what it feels like to be on the receiving end. It's not from the top down where you say, well, here, we're going to match resources with needs. We're trying to listen to what it feels like and meet the real needs rather than do what we want to do. We want to do what they need us to do. So that's kind of a broad overview. I can talk for a long time about it. I'm passionate about it, but hopefully that gives you an idea.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's a neat meeting. We had an interview earlier today, and we were talking about this. Tom, do you know Dick Foth? Do you know that name?
Oh, sure. From Washington, D.C. in the fellowship. Yeah.
He defines love in an interesting way. He says love is the accurate estimation and adequate supply of another person's need. And which I think
is well said.
Yeah, it is well said, and it's what you do. And it's interesting just to hear you describe that in terms of meeting needs, and it's a powerful love in action. Walk us through, Tom, what happened after the mudslides, because I know that changed a lot for the Unity Shop. You guys were, you were front and center in terms of the community's response to that. Walk us through just briefly what happened.
Well, it was a time and a phase that was so unusual for our community. Everybody did everything they knew to do. And it was really gratifying to see so many people step up. Organizations came out of the woodwork. Habitat for Humanity did the Bucket Brigade, 805 and 805 Strong, a lot of different agencies. And then the regular ones, the United Ways, Santa Barbara Foundation. Everybody was stepping up, doing everything they knew to do. And we were involved doing what we do. And we have a long-term disaster recovery program, as I mentioned. But because of that, we have a seat at the table with the Office of Emergency Management. I was the president of VOAD for a long time. That's Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster. So all of that gave us a presence in the midst of the disaster. And we came to the realization that case management was falling through the slats. People were frustrated because they weren't getting the help that they needed. And so we kind of raised our hand and said, this is a need, and we'll play a role with that. Well, the way it works in the nonprofit world is you do what needs to be done with the assumption that you would get reimbursed for the expenses. I mean, you can expend everything, all your resources, all your inventory, all of your time. But if you don't get reimbursed, you end up going out of business. And so that's why it works that way. And we kind of got a little ahead of ourselves because everybody was just scrambling around doing everything they knew to do. So there was nothing malicious about this, but we just didn't get reimbursed for what we had expended. And we spent a lot of time, hired 3 people, devoted ourselves to this case management thing, which was very, very time consuming, hand-holding, walking people through their recovery, which is a lot of mental and spiritual counseling, as well as just the material things, helping people with DMV or with FEMA, with loans, or reimbursement. All this stuff got very complicated, a lot of paperwork. So we just spent a lot of time doing that and ended up expending a lot of time, resources, inventory, as I mentioned. And when that reimbursement came back only at about 20% of what we had expended, we found ourselves in a bit of a crisis. And so we scheduled a temporary closure last year in the months of the end of September up through the very first part of November. And it kind of threw a little bit of sense of doubt in the community, because usually if anybody closes, there's a lack of confidence, or maybe there's hidden mismanagement or something. That really wasn't the case for us, but we wanted the community to know that what had happened, and we wanted to just focus on restabilizing ourselves and kind of raising the funds that we needed to raise. And so we were very successful with that. Super pleased that the community stepped up and really valued the Unity Shop. And thankfully those funds carried us into the very first part of this year, when here comes the virus, and all of a sudden the whole community was thrown into turmoil. And so we've stepped up, focused. We've actually diverted all of our employees and all of our resources toward food distribution, because that is the basic essential need. And our employees are basically frontline folks. I mean, they've got masks and gloves and all the disinfectant and everything, but they're interacting every day with people that they don't know, who could be contagious, who could be infected. So I have the highest regard for our employees who are doing the hard work, and we're thrilled to be able to do it. And we're the only permanent open facility for food distribution, one of the few pantries in town that is permanent. And we offer choice still, and we have dairy and refrigeration and freezers, and so we have all of the full range of food products, which is not even possible with some of the pop-up food distribution places.
And haven't your numbers tripled since COVID?
Actually, more than that, as much as 4 times what we've had traditionally year over year. And so we've had to buy a lot of food. There's no doubt about it. But that's a very efficient way to run the railroad, as long as you have the dollars, because by offering choice, we know what our clients prefer. We know what they will choose. And so sometimes we get food donated to us and it isn't exactly what they would need or would choose. So when we're buying things in bulk, it's a very efficient way to run the railroad. Of course, it costs money, and that's why we're kind of constantly in that fundraising mode. It's one of the downsides of the nonprofit world is there's a dollar sign in front of everything that you do, unfortunately.
Right. And where are you today? So you've been through you fire, the mudslide, COVID, and then you had to close, and then you opened, and now you're quadrupling your food supply. Where are you today in terms of financially, and what do people need to know as we head towards the end of this horrific year? What do people need to know about the Unity Shop and where you are right now?
Well, it's a good question. I'd say we're very stable and very strong. The foundation community has refocused, I would say, from every one of their objectives and guidelines, which is everything, to the basic essential core needs. And so the foundation community has really supported the Unity Shop. The difficulty, of course, is there is a ceiling on how much funding is available through the foundations. They're obligated to give away 5% of their net assets. And when that runs out, and they've been inundated with requests based on this pandemic, so they're on the verge of running out of dollars. And so we can't count on that for the balance of the year, and we're only halfway through. And then, of course, our support from other sources would be, okay, let's see, businesses. Well, a lot of businesses are closed. They're talking about a raft of bankruptcies that are coming. And businesses, not all of them are doing very well, and the economy is down, having been shut down. And now we're in a mandatory shutdown again for the next 3 weeks from the governor. So then another source of donations would be individuals. And often the uncertainty of a stock market, the way it is right now, up and down, no one knows where it's going to go. We've got an election year, and it's just a roller coaster. So the uncertainty puts a hesitation on the part of individuals. So then we're relying upon events. Well, all of them are canceled. So we're saying, okay, we're strong right now, but we're inviting the community's help, because we know that we're not done with this. I was just on a Zoom call with Santa Barbara Foundation right now, and their timeline for the recovery extends to June 2022. a 2-year recovery from this. And so we're not sure, there is no end game. I mean, here we are with a pandemic that is highly contagious, and there is no cure. And it turns out that the youth are very susceptible to getting infected. They don't get impacted from a personal sickness as bad, but they're super contagious. So now what? How do we respond? You got childcare issues, you got school closures, you got people trying to go to work with their school kids at home. There's all kinds of ramifications to this, and we are focusing primarily on food right now. I think, Dean, as we move toward the balance of this year, we're going to heighten and enhance and deepen our Job Smart program, because this whole unemployment thing and getting people lined up with jobs is going to be more of an art form than we've had to respond to in the past. And so we're planning for that. Not even sure what that's going to look like, but we want to expand that significantly.
Right, and if schools, I mean, with schools being so uncertain, that affects working families a lot.
It sure does. It sure does, because the childcare, you know, just this morning I learned a lot of the childcare facilities have closed. Right. Because they don't have the funds to keep going without the kids. Now they're crying, you know, because of the infection. So now the childcare facilities are closing, and when the parents are trying to get back to work, how do you handle that when they need childcare, but there isn't even a place open? They're actually looking for empty buildings to try to create childcare. Well, think of the regulations and the training and the equipment and all of the stuff that's got to take place. We are just not done with this thing. Everybody's tired of it. Right. I agree, and I'm tired of it too, but we can't quit because we're just not done.
Yeah, yeah. Tom, you're you're kind of a pillar of the community, kind of a guy. You're always the same. I love that about you. You're steady. You're always talking about the same stuff. Your heart is like wonderful. In this time,
very kind of you.
I've known you a long time. I'm allowed to tell the truth, Tom.
Okay.
But everybody appreciates you in this community. I can tell you that. I talk to a lot of people. Everybody knows you. They know what you're about. You're steady as she goes, and your heart's for the poor. And you've impacted hundreds of thousands of lives over years. So thank you. But I wanted to ask you this. In the current environment that we're in this period of unrest, in this period of there's a lot of anger. You know, and you know the events that have happened with the police that I think has picked the scab off of a lot of wounds that maybe have never been resolved or addressed. Right. And you combine that with poverty and unemployment, and we have the recipe here, and we're seeing it unfold. The name of your organization seems like it's the right name for this period of time. You know, how do we, what would you say, I guess, in this environment in terms of working toward unity, being peacemakers, caring for those in need? What would be your message, Tom, at this really combustible, difficult time?
Well, it's an excellent question, because we really do need to pull together. Everybody needs to be leaning into this. We used to refer to the golden rule, you know, treat other people the way you'd like to be treated. We often wait to be treated and see if we like it, and then we'll respond maybe. But the initiative is to treat, lean into it, do what was needed to be done, and the results will be much better. Now, from a spiritual point of view, I've often thought that here we are in a situation in the arena that we are all active and trying to react to. And ultimately, there is no real black or white. It's mostly gray. We're mostly in an interim where there's different opinions, wildly different political opinions, different ideas, different concepts, different approaches for everything. And so in a sense, it's a test of character on how well you can love each other in the midst of unanswerable conflict. And rather than being reduced to just writing off the other person as a fool or an idiot and saying, I don't care what you come up with, it's wrong. And besides that, I don't like you anyway, kind of a thing. I mean, that's where this conversation, this conversation goes nationally. And so let's not go there. Let's say, okay, let's listen, understand what the other person is saying and what they're coming up to. And our character development will be enhanced, and we'll come up with better ideas and better answers. We've tried to do that with Unity by listening to what it feels like. And that emotional component is really wild. I don't know if I ever told you, we had a lady come to us last Christmas who drove up from LA, and she handed us a check for $1,000. And she said, you know, a long time ago, I married an artist who essentially was failing. I had 3 kids. We were going to have the worst Christmas we ever had in our lives. We didn't have toys. We didn't even have food. And she said, here's a check. Thank you so much to the Unity Shop. You helped my family 52 years ago.
Wow.
That's what I said. Wow. She's still thinking about that 52 years ago. So the message is, every family that comes to the Unity Shop, there's an emotional impact. Everybody is feeling something, whether it's articulated or not. And most of these people that are on the receiving end feel like they have no voice. They feel like they're invisible. And so they feel like they're in a very weak position. We need to lift those people up. We need to listen. We need to do the right thing, realizing that the emotional component is what will last a long, long, long time. And that's where the meaning comes from, Dee.
Yeah, I mean, you're an advocate. The Unity Shop's an advocate. I think about that. You know, and you don't forget when you're behind the 8 ball or you're in the corner and you're in your worst moment, you don't forget the person who helps you in that moment.
Yeah, that's really true. Yeah. The parable of the Good Samaritan is kind of an interesting deal, because everybody thinks, you know, if you're familiar with the story, you always think, well, who's your neighbor? Because, you know, Jesus said, you know, love God, love your neighbor. And so that's what we're trying to do at Unity. And so the question came back from the lawyer, well, who's my neighbor? And we always think it's the guy in the ditch. You know, you're supposed to go help the guy in the ditch. And ultimately, was it the Pharisee? Was it the priest? No, it was the Samaritan. Well, who's the Samaritan? The Samaritan is the guy that came along and did the helping. So here are these people. This is the woman in LA. She didn't forget the person who helped her, the organization that helped her. So there's more than one way to interpret that parable. We're supposed to go and do likewise. That's take care of the guy in the ditch, take care of the people that are struggling, but also remember the people that are doing the helping. We should be honoring all those first responders that are out there. Like I'm trying to honor and respect and take good care of our employees, because they're doing that work. They're going the extra mile to help people. And that's really what we should be about. And if we were all to do that, you know, that golden rule, if everybody treated everybody else the way they'd like to be treated, all of a sudden, Washington, D.C. would be fixed. Sacramento would be a lot better. City Hall would work. Every family would work. Every business would work. It's one of those simple one-liners that Jesus came up with that actually could change the world.
Let Washington, D.C. know about this idea, Tom.
Yeah, a good idea. They probably haven't heard of it.
Right. Only minutes left, but I wanted real quick, tell the Brad Paisley story. I always love this. He's a local guy.
Well, he bought a house in Montecito. Don't mean to interrupt. You were kind of cutting out there for a second, but he bought a house in Montecito. He thought his kids were getting a little entitled. Jasper was 3, Huck was 7, so he was getting an early start on this. But he called his realtor and said, we're coming to our home in Montecito, and we want to volunteer at a soup kitchen or something to give our kids an experience of helping other people. But we don't know anybody. We just bought a house in Montecito, don't know where to go. So the realtor said, no, you need to get down to the Unity Shop. And so here comes Brad with his wife, Kim Williams, the actress, the 2 kids. Sandy's the mom. She takes care of the kids. Doug is his dad, Brad's dad, and he drives the bus, okay, on the tours. And they came for a long tour, and he was asking a lot of in-depth questions about the nonprofit world and about the Unity Shop. And I didn't realize until years later that he was actually doing research, because he cares about his hometown in Nashville, And 2 years ago, he said, I played every major city in America, and there is nothing like the Unity Shop. And so it turns out that 3 weeks before the virus broke out, just before the hurricanes in Nashville, tornadoes in Nashville, he opened the second Unity Shop in Nashville. And so it's a wonderful story. And he calls it the store. So families can grab the kids and say, come on, we're going to the store just like everybody else. No second-class citizen. The interesting thing there, though, is that he put it on his college campus, Belmont University in downtown Nashville. And as soon as he did that, we had 4 college campuses contact us and say, Brad, what are you doing? We need that for our community on our campus. We've got food insecure students. Between 5 and 8% are food insecure college kids on average. And we need the kids to be volunteering, learning about the nonprofit world. This could be an interesting way that the Unity Shop concept, unique in all of America, as close as I can tell, gets replicated.
That's powerful. That's powerful. That's wonderful. The website is Unity Shop with an E at the end of shop. So
It's actually Old English spelling is SHOPPE. Kenny Loggins named it that way because we let them do that. We don't give them anything. We let them select. That's shop. So unityshop.org. That's it. Sorry to interrupt.
That's a wonderful man, good friend. Tom, I admire you. Appreciate everything you do, and Marcia too. Marcia's right with you in everything you do. So God bless you guys, and we're with you. And I encourage anybody who's watching to help out Unity Shop and get to know Tom. He'll give you a tour. I've done that several times. It's great. So thank you, Tom.
I appreciate it, Dean. Thanks very much for the time.
We'll see you next time.
All right. Bye now.
If you like what you just saw, there's a lot more at goodlifetelevision.org. Good Life TV is really about the good things in life. We try to dwell on noble, hopeful, excellence. So go to goodlifetelevision.org. You can see a broad range of guests, some overcomers, some entrepreneurs, just incredible people. So I encourage you to check it out, goodlifetelevision.org. Thanks for watching.